When I asked my children who wanted to keep the house after I passed, they argued over who would sell it fastest. No one asked about the memories inside, so I sold it while I was still alive and used the money to travel the world. Alone. For the first time in 40 years. My name is Evelyn, and I'm 72. For 45 of those years, I lived in a 2-story colonial on Maple Street with my husband, Daniel. He was the heart of that house, the one who knew the language of its creaks and groans, the one who mended its fences and painted its walls with the same devotion he tended our marriage. After a sudden heart attack stole him from me 2 years ago, the house became my fortress and my prison. Each room a vault of memories too precious to disturb, too painful to inhabit fully. The garden Daniel planted still bloomed every spring. The porch swing he built still swayed in the summer breeze. The faint scent of his pipe tobacco still clung to the armchair in his study. These were the things I thought about when I considered the future. The house wasn't just wood and plaster. It was the manuscript of our life together, the backdrop against which our 3 children, Mark, Olivia, and Ben, had grown from noisy infants into the distant, preoccupied adults they had become. It was after a routine doctor's visit, where a slightly elevated blood pressure reading was treated with the gravity of a ticking clock, that I decided it was time to have the talk. Not about my health, which was perfectly fine for a woman my age, but about practicalities, about the house. I didn't want to leave them with a burden or a source of conflict. I imagined one of them, perhaps Olivia with her own young family, wanting to raise her children under the same roof where she'd measured her own height against the kitchen doorframe. I arranged a conference call. Mark, my eldest, the financial analyst, was predictably punctual. Olivia, a marketing executive juggling a career and 2 toddlers, joined a few minutes late, sounding flustered. Ben, my youngest, a freelance graphic designer whose life seemed to be a series of temporary gigs and ever-shifting addresses, was the last to connect, his voice echoing slightly as if he were in an empty room. "Thank you all for making the time," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. I wanted to discuss the house, long term, after I'm no longer here. I was wondering if any of you had given any thought to wanting to keep it in the family. A brief silence followed, the kind that hums with unspoken calculations. Geese cleared his throat first. "Well, Mom, that's very practical of you to bring up. Realistically, keeping it doesn't make a lot of financial sense. The property taxes in that area are significant, and it's an older house, so the upkeep, it's a substantial liability." He spoke with the cool detachment of someone discussing a stock portfolio. "It's a beautiful house, Mom," Olivia chimed in, her voice softer, tinged with a hint of what I hoped was sentiment. "So many wonderful memories. We brought Lily home from the hospital to that house." I pictured my granddaughter taking her first wobbly steps in the living room. But Mark's right. With our careers and the kids' school district, relocating just wouldn't be feasible. And managing it as a rental from this distance would be a nightmare. My gaze drifted to the faded pencil mark on the kitchen door frame, Daniel's careful script noting, "Olivia, age 6. A nightmare. "What about you, Ben?" I asked, a sliver of hope still flickering. Ben had always been the dreamer, the one less concerned with practicality. "The house?" he said, as if the thought had never occurred to him. "Wow. It's huge, Mom. Way too big for me, I guess. If I had to, I could maybe live there for a bit, while I figured things out. But I couldn't afford the upkeep on my own. Not a chance. No one asked if I was managing the upkeep. No one asked how I was affording the taxes." Then the conversation shifted, subtly at first, then with an alarming velocity. It pivoted from whether anyone wanted the house to how quickly they could divest themselves of it. "The market in your neighborhood is actually pretty hot right now, Mom," Mark said, his voice gaining an almost enthusiastic edge. "If we listed at the right time, maybe early spring, we could probably get a very good price for it. We'd need to get a solid realtor, someone who knows how to move properties fast." "We should probably get it professionally staged," Olivia added, already in marketing mode. "Declutter, a fresh coat of neutral paint, that really helps buyers visualize themselves in the space." She wasn't talking about my space, my home. She was talking about a product. Ben, surprisingly, piped up. "I know a guy who flips houses. He always says the kitchen and bathroom sell a place. Maybe we should look into some minor upgrades before listing, just to maximize the return." My heart sank. They weren't just discussing selling it, they were dissecting it, parceling out its potential, their voices devoid of any emotional resonance. It was as if I had asked them to divide a pie, and they were already arguing over the size of the slices and who had the sharpest knife. We'd need to agree on an agent, Mark continued, a new note of authority in his voice. Someone with a strong local presence. I can do some research on top performers in that zip code. Well, I'm closer, Mark, Olivia countered, a slight edge to her tone. It would probably be easier for me to meet with agents, oversee any minor work. Maybe it makes sense for me to take the lead on that. As long as we're all agreed on the strategy, Mark said coolly. The key is a quick sale at the optimal price point. No emotional decision-making. Purely business. Purely business. 45 years of laughter, tears, first steps, last breaths, Christmas mornings, and quiet Sunday evenings. All distilled down to a business transaction. No one mentioned the rose garden Daniel had babied for 3 decades. No one asked about the attic filled with their childhood artwork, their old school reports, the meticulously labeled boxes of their past lives that I had carefully preserved. No one asked what would happen to the memories. I sat there, clutching the phone, listening to my children, my flesh and blood, strategize the quickest, most profitable erasure of my life with Daniel. They weren't malicious. They were just practical, efficient, and utterly oblivious to the silent scream building in my chest. When the call finally ended, with their promises to circle back with some numbers and agent recommendations, I walked through the house as if I were seeing it for the first time, or perhaps the last. I touched the worn spot on the banister where countless small hands had slid down. I stood in the doorway of Daniel's study and imagined him looking up from his book, smiling at me. I saw Olivia, aged 5, putting on a ballet recital in the living room for an audience of 2. I saw Mark painstakingly building a Lego castle at the kitchen table. I saw Ben, a teenager, holed up in his room with his guitar, the muffled chords a soundtrack to his angst. These walls didn't just hold memories. They were memories. And my children, the very people those memories were built around, saw only an asset to be liquidated. The phrase, "sell it fastest," echoed in my mind. It wasn't just about the money for them. It was about the convenience of speed, the desire to dispense with the inconvenience of a past they had clearly outgrown. A different thought began to take root, a tiny, rebellious seed in the barren ground of my disappointment. If the house was just a commodity, if its value was only monetary, then why should the timing of that transaction be dictated by my death? Why should they be the sole beneficiaries of a life they no longer seem to value in anything but dollars and cents? For 40 years, my life had been about us. Daniel and me, then Daniel and me, and the children. My dreams, my desires had always been filtered through the prism of the family. What I wanted had always come second, or third, or fourth. I walked into Daniel's study, sat down at his old oak desk, and pulled out a piece of notepaper. I didn't reach for the phone to call my lawyer to discuss my will. The conversation I'd just had with my children had made that document feel suddenly irrelevant regarding the house. Instead, I picked up a pen and wrote down a name. It was the name of a local real estate agent, someone whose for sale signs I'd seen around the neighborhood, signs that often changed to sold with remarkable speed. A new kind of practicality was settling over me, a clarity born of profound hurt. If the house was going to be sold, it would be sold, but it would be on my terms. And the proceeds? Well, the proceeds were going to fund a life I hadn't realized I'd put on hold for nearly half a century. Veer. The decision, once made, felt like a key turning in a long, rusted lock. The following Monday, I called Mrs. Albright, the realtor whose name I jotted down. She was a woman in her late 60s, with a kind smile and eyes that seemed to understand more than was being said. She didn't talk about maximizing returns or quick flips. She asked me about my favorite room in the house, about the memories Daniel and I had made there. When I told her, very simply, that my children were not interested in keeping it, and that I wished to sell it to fund a different kind of future for myself, she merely nodded. "Then let's make that happen for you, Evelyn," she said. The process of preparing the house for sale was an archaeological dig through my own life. Mrs. Albright was gentle, suggesting I edit the rooms rather than declutter them. Each item I touched held a story. Daniel's collection of battered paperback thrillers, Olivia's chipped teacup from a childhood tea set, Mark's surprisingly well-preserved scout badges, Ben's angst-filled teenage poetry scribbled in a notebook. I packed away the things that whispered directly to my heart into carefully labeled boxes destined for a small storage unit. These were my memories. Not for sale. I offered some of Daniel's tools to Mark, thinking of his own Suburban. Garage. He declined. No room, Mom, and I mostly use power tools these days. I asked Olivia if she wanted her grandmother's china. It's lovely, Mom, but so delicate. We just use the everyday stuff. Maybe Lily will want it someday? Ben, when I offered him Daniel's old record player and vinyl collection, said, Cool, but where would I put it? Everything's digital now, Mom. Their polite refusals were tiny paper cuts, each one a reminder of the chasm between their lives and the life Daniel and I had built. The house, under Mrs. Albright's guidance, went on the market on a crisp autumn morning. To my surprise, and perhaps to my children's future chagrin, it sold within a week for a sum that exceeded my quiet expectations. The closing was swift, the new owners a young family with bright-eyed children who reminded me of my own, long ago. It was only then, with the papers signed and the money secured in a new bank account bearing only my name, that I called my children for another conference call. I have some news, I said, my voice calm, betraying none of the turbulent emotions I'd navigated in the preceding weeks. I've sold the house on Maple Street. The silence on the other end was profound, heavier than the last. It was Richard, Mark in my earlier thoughts, but Richard he became, who broke it, his voice sharp with disbelief. You sold it? Already? Mom, we were supposed to discuss agents, strategy. I was putting together a comparison report. I found an agent I was comfortable with, Richard, I said. She handled everything beautifully. But the price? He stammered. Did you get a proper market valuation? Did you get multiple offers? Sometimes a quick sale means leaving money on the table. I'm very satisfied with the price, dear, I replied. Olivia sounded winded, as if she'd been punched. Oh, Mom, so fast. I guess I just assumed we'd have time. To go through things properly, to say goodbye to it. I went through everything, Olivia, I said. I kept what mattered. Ben was quiet, then finally mumbled, Wow, so it's done then. The old house. There was a note of something in his voice. Surprise, perhaps a little wistfulness, but no real protest. Yes, Ben, it's done. I paused, then delivered the next part of my news. And with the proceeds, I've decided to do some traveling. Traveling? Richard's voice was tight. Mom, are you sure that's wise? At your age? That money should be carefully invested. Long-term care, inflation. Have you considered the implications? I'm investing in my present, Richard, I said. As for my age, I believe it's the perfect age to finally see some of the world. But alone? Olivia asked, her voice laced with a concern that felt more like disapproval. Is that safe? Where would you even go? I'll be perfectly safe, and I'm starting with Italy, Florence, Venice, Rome. Your father. And I always talked about it, but there was always a mortgage, school fees, braces. My voice didn't waver. Italy. Wow, Mom, that's amazing, Ben said, a spark of genuine enthusiasm in his voice, the first I'd heard from any of them regarding my plans. Send me a postcard, okay? I will, dear, I promised. The weeks leading up to my departure were a blur of activity. I moved into a small, furnished apartment Mrs. Albright had found for me. A temporary nest. I updated my passport, bought a new set of luggage, and spent hours in the local library poring over travel guides, the names, of exotic cities like Marrakech, Kyoto, and Buenos Aires rolling off my tongue like forgotten incantations. For the first time in years, I felt a thrill of anticipation that was entirely my own. I was not planning a family vacation or a trip to see the grandchildren. I was planning my adventure. My children called, of course. Richard sent me articles about travel insurance and managing finances abroad. Olivia offered to help me pack, an offer I politely declined. She would want to pack sensibly, and I wanted to pack with joy. Ben sent me links to travel blogs. Their reactions were a mixed bag of anxiety, bewilderment, and in Ben's case, a touch of vicarious excitement. But none of them truly understood. They couldn't see past the sale of the asset to the liberation it represented for me. The day I left the house on Maple Street for the last time, I walked through its empty rooms. The furniture was gone, the walls were bare, but the sunlight still slanted through the windows in the same familiar way. The ghosts were there. Daniel, laughing in the kitchen, the children chasing each other down the hall. I whispered my goodbyes, not to the wood and plaster, but to the life we had lived within them. It was a tender farewell, tinged with sadness, but not regret. My first flight was to Florence. Stepping out of the small airport into the Tuscan sun, I felt a wave of sensations, the musicality of the Italian language, the scent of unfamiliar blossoms and diesel, the warmth on my skin. It was overwhelming, terrifying, and utterly exhilarating. I found my way to the small pension I had booked near the Duomo, my heart thudding a rhythm of fear and freedom. That evening, I sat alone at a tiny table outside a trattoria, a glass of Chianti in my hand, the magnificent Duomo illuminated before me. The city hummed with life. Couples strolled hand in hand, families laughed, Vespas buzzed past. I was an observer, an outsider, a woman of 72, alone in a foreign land for the first time in 40 years. A profound sense of solitude washed over me, different from the loneliness I'd felt in my empty house. This was a chosen solitude, a space to breathe, to think, to simply be. I thought of my children, scattered in their busy lives, probably still discussing the sensibility of my decision. They thought I was running away from something. Old age, loneliness, memories. They didn't understand that I was running towards something, towards myself. The Evelyn who had existed before marriage and motherhood. The Evelyn who had her own dreams. I raised my glass to the Florentine night, a silent toast to the journey ahead. It had just begun. Florence was an awakening. Venice, a dream. Rome, a vibrant echo of history. I, Evelyn, a widow from Maple Street, navigated cobblestone alleyways with a well-worn map, deciphered bus timetables in lyrical Italian, and learned to order gelato with the confidence of a local. There were moments of profound loneliness, usually in the evenings, when the city lights would blur through a film of unshed tears for Daniel, for the life we'd shared, for the easy comfort of the familiar. But those moments were increasingly punctuated by an exhilarating sense of discovery. I discovered I had a decent eye for art, a surprising tolerance for grappa, and an unexpected knack for striking up conversations with strangers using a combination of smiles, gestures, and the few Italian phrases I'd mastered. After Italy, I found myself drawn to the intricate beauty of Kyoto. The serene gardens and ancient temples offered a different kind of solace, a quietude that resonated with a part of me I hadn't known existed. I learned the art of sitting still, of observing the fall of a single maple leaf, of finding peace in a meticulously raked bed of gravel. My children received postcards filled with descriptions of cherry blossoms and tea ceremonies. Ben, bless. His heart sent back cheerful notes and funny little doodles. Olivia's emails were a mix of thinly veiled anxiety about my well-being and updates about the grandchildren's latest milestones. A school play, a lost tooth. Richard's occasional messages were invariably about the stock market and gentle reminders to be prudent. They were still operating on a different frequency, their lives a whirlwind of schedules and obligations, while mine had slowed to the rhythm of my own footsteps and the quiet unfolding of each new day. One afternoon, sitting on a bench overlooking the Arashiyama bamboo grove in Kyoto, a young Australian backpacker asked if I was traveling alone. When I said yes, she smiled. "That's brilliant. My Nan always wanted to do something like this, but she never thought she could." "I didn't think I could either," I admitted. For a very long time, that brief exchange stayed with me. I realized I wasn't just traveling for myself. I was, in some small way, traveling for all the women like me, the ones who had lovingly tended the hearths of their families, often forgetting to stoke the fires of their own desires. The most challenging leg of my journey was 6 weeks in India. The vibrant chaos, the sheer intensity of life there pushed me to my limits. I got terribly lost in the labyrinthine streets of Old Delhi, battled a stomach bug in a remote Rajasthani village, and found myself unexpectedly weeping during a sunrise boat ride on the Ganges. But through it all, I discovered a resilience I never knew I possessed. I learned to haggle fiercely, to trust my instincts, to find beauty in the most unexpected places, and to accept help from strangers who showed me breathtaking kindness. Daniel would have been utterly terrified and secretly thrilled for me. The house on Maple Street, with its predictable comforts and its heavy cloak of memory, felt a lifetime away. My communication with my children during this period was sporadic. Olivia called once, sounding genuinely concerned after I'd mentioned my bout of illness. "Mom, maybe it's time to come home. This is all a bit much, don't you think?" "I'm perfectly fine, dear," I'd assured her, perhaps downplaying the severity of the deli belly. "It's all part of the adventure." I heard her sigh, a sound I knew well. It was the sigh of a daughter who loved her mother, but simply could not comprehend her. Richard, upon hearing I was considering a trip to South America next, sent me a detailed financial projection outlining how quickly my funds would deplete at my current rate of expenditure. He suggested I consider a more stable, less nomadic lifestyle. I thanked him for his concern and booked a flight to Buenos Aires. It was there, dancing a clumsy but joyous tango with a kind older gentleman in a neighborhood milonga, that I had an epiphany. The house on Maple Street was sold. The memories, however, were not. They were mine. I carried them with me, not as heavy baggage, but as well-loved souvenirs. They no longer resided in the scent of Daniel's old armchair or the height charts on the kitchen doorframe. They lived in me. And because of that, they were free to travel with me, their weightlessness a testament to their enduring power. After nearly 18 months abroad, I decided to return, not to a fixed address, but to a new phase. I didn't. Buy another house. I rented a small, sun-filled apartment in a coastal town I'd never visited before, a place with no history for me, only future. It was a base, not an anchor. My children came to visit, one by one. Richard surveyed the small apartment with a critical eye, probably calculating its square footage versus its rental cost. Olivia brought housewarming gifts and tried to organize my kitchen cupboards. Ben brought a canvas and spent an afternoon painting the view from my balcony. The conversations were different. I was no longer just Mom, the fixture in the old house. I was Evelyn, the woman who had seen the Taj Mahal at sunrise, who had hiked a portion of the Inca Trail, who could order coffee in 5 languages. They listened to my stories with a mixture of awe and, I think, a touch of bewilderment. One evening, Olivia and I were looking at photos from my travels. "You seem so happy, Mom," she said, a note of surprise in her voice. "Happier than I've seen you in years." "I am happy, dear," I said. "I found out that the world is a very big place, and my little corner of it can be wherever I choose." Richard never fully understood. He still occasionally mentions sensible investments, but even he, I think, began to see me differently. Less as a dependent elderly mother, more as an unpredictable, independent entity. Ben, however, got it. He started planning his own backpacking trip through Southeast Asia. "You inspired me, Mom," he said, showing me his proposed itinerary. And in that moment, I felt a different kind of legacy taking shape, one not measured in property values or inherited possessions, but in the quiet spark of courage passed from one generation to the next. I still travel. Not constantly, like before, but for a few months each year. I've learned that home isn't a place you own, but a feeling you cultivate. The money from the house on Maple Street is dwindling, as Richard so helpfully predicted. But what I've gained in return, the experiences, the confidence, the rediscovery of myself, is immeasurable. My children and I, we're finding a new way. They don't argue anymore about who would sell the house fastest. Instead, they ask me where I'm going next. And they listen, really listen, when I tell them about the memories I'm making, the ones that are all my own.